Biden. The new Congress is off and running, but before many issues get debated and voted on, there are some significant political developments happening in D.C., including news that more political figures are finding classified documents at their homes. First, it was the highly public battle with former President Trump to retrieve documents from Mar-a-Lago, and then representatives for President Biden found some at his properties. And this week, a lawyer for former Vice President Mike Pence found classified documents at his Indiana home. Here to talk about this and a lot more, Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to be here.
The National Archives has asked all of the former presidents and former vice presidents to look for classified documents in their files. A lot of people out there are saying, what is going on?
I know it's very troubling, and I think we need to see what both special investigators who have been appointed come back with. But the fact is, we have laws that say these documents are classified because they are very important to our national security. Sometimes there are sources that are revealed in classified documents that could be at risk if that information gets out. And so it's a serious matter. We need to take it seriously. We need to see what the special investigators come back with. And I can tell you, as a senator, the only time I ever see classified documents is in the SCIF, which is the room that is designed to make sure that nobody can hear or see what's being looked at in there. And so we need to find out what happened here and make sure it doesn't continue to happen.
Do you think that there should be a special counsel for Vice President Pence, as there was in the cases of Biden and Trump?
I don't know enough about the records that have been found and how far back they date. Do they date to his vice presidential time, which is what it sounds like? Do they date to his time in Congress? But I think those special investigators are going to give us some real insights into what we should be thinking about in the future.
But with all this new news, a lot of people are wondering, how widespread is this? And do we have to change our policy and procedures here?
Well, I think that's what we've got to look at. Clearly, we can't continue to put at risk the national security of this country or those people who are working hard to defend it. And that's the challenge with classified documents. We cannot allow them to get into the wrong hands.
I mean, people just can't believe that they would end up at their personal residences.
Well, that's what's so hard to understand. And as I say, as a senator, the only time I ever see those documents is when I'm in a secure room. And so the idea that they would have been taken out of that secure room, I understand it's a little different for presidents, but that's what we have to examine.
This is also probably going to weigh into the presidential race. And we're wondering, what do you think about whether President Biden should run again?
Well, he hasn't announced what he's going to do, and obviously I support the president in many things. There are some things that I don't support him on, so we'll see what he decides.
Okay, and let's talk about one of those things that you don't support him on. And let's talk about the First in the Nation primary here in New Hampshire. The president has set out his idea for the way it should run, that South Carolina should be first, followed by New Hampshire and Nevada 3 days later. Obviously, you don't agree, and you're in alignment with a lot of Republicans here in the state who also don't agree. What is the next step here? I understand we've gotten an extension through June. The DNC wants us to change our law, but will that happen?
I don't think so. We have a law that says New Hampshire will be a week ahead of any similar contest, and obviously what the DNC is proposing, the Democratic National Committee is proposing, would be in violation of that law. I think our law will continue on the books and go forward. What is being asked of the party in New Hampshire is not realistic. We've already heard from the governor and the Republican legislature that they don't support changing the date, and I don't support it either. I think the DNC is wrong. I think the president is wrong on this. The fact is, New Hampshire for over 100 years has had a very important role in the presidential selection process, in vetting those candidates. And I think it's important to remind people that the reason New Hampshire started that first primary was because we believed that average voters should be able to weigh in on who the candidates are, that should not be determined in smoke-filled back rooms by party bosses. And that's really the genesis of the New Hampshire primary, and it's continued for 100 years because the voters here take it very seriously. They're engaged. I've talked, as I'm sure you have, talked to so many people during the primary season who go to see not just all the Democratic candidates or all the Republican candidates, but they go see candidates on both sides, because our primary is open to independents who are really critical in determining who the President of the United States is going to be. And, you know, I agree it would be good to have more diversity up front in the primary schedule for the Democratic Party, but we could do that without moving the New Hampshire first primary. So I'm disappointed in what the committee has decided, and I hope we're going to be able to convince them that it doesn't make sense to change the schedule.
What's being done to make them change their minds?
Well, I think we're having some effect because they have realized that the conditions that they've placed on the Democratic Party are onerous and they're not going to be able to be met. That's become pretty clear. And we've been trying to make sure that people across the country understand why New Hampshire's primary has been important in vetting candidates, that you don't have to have a big war chest, you don't have to have a lot of name recognition, you don't have to be the party establishment candidate, and you can get the nomination because voters in New Hampshire are going to listen to you, they're going to engage with you, they're going to give you a chance. The best recent example I have is of John McCain. When he was counted out, he had no money, he had to fire all his campaign staff, and he came to New Hampshire and he engaged with the voters, he had town hall meetings all across the state, and he then became the nominee of the party.
And people in the state have enjoyed that access to all of these presidential candidates, and a lot of people love that ability to go and talk to them face to face and let them know what they think. And it might change.
And ask really tough questions. You know, I remember talking to Elizabeth Warren after she got into the race for the 2020 election, talking about her first trip to New Hampshire and how surprised she was at the detailed questions that she got from voters everywhere she went in the state about issues ranging from the national debt to PFAS. So this is something that voters here take very seriously, and that's developed over 100 years of, we have more elections than almost any other state because we have our town meeting, we have elections every 2 years for everyone but the United States senators.
What do you think about this tactic of punishing candidates should they still come here?
I don't think that makes sense, and you know, the party has tried to do that in the past, and with Michigan trying to sanction them, and they wound up changing that. So hopefully they're going to recognize that this is not the best approach. The fact is we're going to have, I assume we're going to have a number of Republican candidates for president in New Hampshire because the RNC has already set their primary calendar and they've left New Hampshire where it is. And I don't think the Democratic Party wants to be out of that discussion and all of the news coverage and the attention that those candidates are going to get when they're in New Hampshire.
What do you think is going to happen here?
I think it remains to be seen. I think we're going to have the New Hampshire primary on the date that it's been scheduled.
I want to talk to you about the debt ceiling. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says that we can pay our bills through early June. And do you think that we're going to default here in the U.S.?
I don't think we should negotiate with anybody who says we shouldn't pay our bills. The reality is that raising the debt ceiling is not about new spending. It's about spending that we've already incurred. And most countries don't require raising the debt ceiling. This is a uniquely political mechanism that got put in place as a political deal a number of years ago, and I think we need to change it. It's not good for the country. It puts at risk markets. It puts at risk businesses who are trying to borrow, credit rating, and the world is looking at us because our financial system, our worldwide financial system, is really pegged to the dollar and to what happens in the United States. And so it not just puts at risk New Hampshire businesses across this country, but around the world, it puts at risk our financial system. You know, I remember when I was governor working very hard to make sure that our bond rating stayed the same, because I knew what the impact would be on the banking system in New Hampshire, on businesses, if our credit rating got downgraded. Think about what happened in 2011 when the country's credit rating got downgraded because we were having this kind of a face-off. This is not acceptable, and I would hope that all the business people who are watching out there, all the local and state officials who are watching, are going to call those people in Congress on the Republican side of the aisle, and it's not everybody, it's some of those House members who are talking about letting the country default, and share with them the drastic consequences of that, because it wouldn't just affect markets' credit rating, it would also affect Social Security checks and Medicare. It puts at risk our men and women in the military who are dependent on payments. It puts at risk government contracts. It is a crazy idea, and anybody who thinks that's a realistic possibility doesn't understand what's happening.
Not everyone seems to have the same urgency in Washington right now.
Absolutely, and we should have, because, you know, we've got the economic news from the last quarter was pretty positive, 2.9% growth. The growth overall last year was over 2%, so that was better than a lot of economists were predicting. But we are still at risk of a recession this year, and nothing is going to bring on a recession, layoffs, all of the dysfunction that will come from that, like a fight over the debt ceiling.